Hi, Roger.
Hey, Ann, how are you
I
today?
am great. Welcome back, everybody, to I'm Spiritual But. This is our second episode already. We're so grateful for the overwhelmingly positive response we got from our pilot show last week and are just so excited that you've joined us here again today. I just wanted to remind you or share with you, if you're new, what this show is about. So, our written vision for the show, it's short, don't worry, it's one sentence, is to reflect the light of every viewer so they live their dreams more fully and trust their own spiritual path more profoundly. So, what that really means to Roger and myself is we want to create a spiritually inclusive space for you, for the people you know and love, a non judgmental space, a space that is simply here to feed you, to encourage you, and to motivate you, whether you're religious or not religious. How are you connecting to your spiritual self, and how can that become a more rich experience? And every week we have incredible guests on the show who share their stories and experiences. And we will have one here today. But before we do that, Roger, you had a few things to share.
So, Ann, I want to share with you that I had the most inspiring dream this week that relates directly to the theme of our show today. Before I give you the details of the dream, let me share with you just some pertinent information. My husband, Jerry, and I love to travel. We have traveled the world and we've seen almost all the places we've wanted to see. One of the few places left is to see South Africa. In the meantime, most of our trips lately have been Caribbean cruises. We've cruised so often that we don't even go to the islands anymore because we've already visited all the islands that the ships go to. So now, when we take a cruise, we consider the ship our sanctuary and we just get on board, stay on the ship, enjoy the Caribbean, and then we don't disembark until we get back to our home port. That's the background information you needed for the
That
dream.
sounds fun.
So here's the dream. My uncle invited Jerry and me and all our extended family to take a Caribbean cruise. We learned that he was paying for it, he was planning it. All we needed to do was show up. So when the family all boarded the ship, the captain greeted us and he said, "Your uncle had a special request. He chartered this ship so that we don't stop at any islands. We're just going to cruise the Caribbean the whole trip so that you can enjoy time with family." Well, my thought was, that's nice. That's nice. That's very familiar. That's the way Jerry and I have been doing it lately. It's how it's been done before. We'll do what we've done before. That'll be great. This is going to be very pleasant. The last night of our final dinner, the captain came to the table after the dinner and he said, there was actually a different dream that my uncle had. We told you that we were cruising the Caribbean, but your uncle's real dream was to cruise to South Africa with his entire extended family. After the announcement, I walked over to this wall that displayed this gorgeous map of the world etched in slate, and I looked down to the bottom, and there was this tiny point of light that's designated where our ship was in the world at that moment. And I looked closer and I saw how near we were to the coast of South Africa. And here was the big epiphany in this dream. When I saw the light and I saw South Africa, I thought, wow, how much more I would have enjoyed this journey if I knew all along I was in new territory heading directly to my dream.
Mm.
When I think of this show and what we're sharing with people, it's all about being spiritually awake and not just assuming our day to day life looks familiar. This is what we're doing. This is what I do. This is my routine. Every day, something new is coming to us. And eventually, we are going to realize every single detail of every day has led us to exactly what we've always dreamed of and hoped for.
Mm. I love that. What an amazing dream, and how beautiful that you instantly felt that connection, that meaning. Like, mm.
I
Well,
knew I knew it was for the show. The minute I
yeah,
had it, I woke up, wrote it down, think, okay, now this has to be shared on the show.
because you're all going to find out in a minute what this show is going to be about. And yes, this is it's wonderful, wonderful connection. Oh, so Roger, before we do that, would you like to just tell us a couple things about our guest today?
Sure. So Nancy AYRE is our guest today. She has achieved so much. I'm just going to read. She has achieved so much. I'm going to just read the biography she shared with us. She is a social work graduate student attending at the University of Houston. She's passionate about working with the international community and is currently working for an organization that provides support for refugees and new arrivals to the U.S. She has recently been involved in the community advocacy for children in foster care, doing interfaith outreach, creating supportive spaces for LGBTQ people in her community, and substitute teaching at a local school. Some of her greatest adventures include learning how to speak Romanian, backpacking South Africa by herself. Interesting that South Africa should show up again here, and raising children in her blended family. Nancy does a blog with her father, who is also a social worker. It's called Riverside Chats. The posts are chats between a father and a daughter about relationships, happiness, mental health, and new perspectives. Would you please welcome our guest, Nancy AYRE?
Hi, Nancy.
Hello.
Thank you for being with us today in this comfortable, cozy chat room that we have. I get my cup of coffee. I'm just so happy to have you here and your beautiful energy. And I don't know if you could hear backstage, but Roger just shared your bio, which is just lovely and so many exciting things I can't wait to hear more about. Just before we get started, we want to read a quote. And as viewers know, every week we bookend our episode with a quote that's chosen by the guest at the beginning and the end that kind of reflects the theme of what we're going to talk about. Now, it doesn't have to be a spiritual quote. It can be any kind of quote that's meaningful. So this one is just beautiful. And this was what Nancy chose, and I will read it. You're going to recognize it. It's a loved classic. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And of course, that's by Robert Frost. So what does this quote mean to you, and what motivated you to share it with us?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say I am so honored to be here. And after listening to your last episode, I just felt that it was such a safe and comfortable space. And I love that you're creating this inclusive, non-judgmental space. And so thank you so much. When Roger spoke to me about choosing a quote, whether that was from someone well-known or something that someone had said to me, to be honest, the very first thing that came to my mind that had an impact on me, and this is connected to the Robert Frost quote, but when I was in high school, in my English class, I had a teacher that said to me in front of the class, kind of stopped what she was doing, and she looked at me and she said, "Nancy, you march to the beat of a different drummer." And I remember in that moment thinking, okay, this could either be a criticism or this could be a compliment. And I'm going to choose to take it as a compliment. But it has had really a profound impact on my life. It sent the message to me that you do things differently. And it really felt connected to this quote, the Robert Frost quote that's from obviously his famous poem. And I recognize, first of all, I just want to say, I know that this quote can have meaning in 100 different ways, and people make meaning of it, of how it's important to them. But I guess for me, what it means is just that in life, we're going to not only come across opportunities, but also create opportunities where we can choose to take a road either that's well-traveled, that a lot of people are going on, or a road that's less traveled. And so when I think about my life and the experiences that I've had, yes, some things that are on that well-traveled road is a good path, but most of the things that I feel like are most meaningful or significant, profound, are usually off the beaten path. I like to think of Brene Brown's concept of braving the wilderness, and those experiences have made all the differences for me.
That's so beautiful. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. And also one of my favorite quotes, as I told Nancy in the pre-interview, I said, this quote, I love it so much. It's the only magnet on my fridge. Literally means so much to me. So Roger, you and Nancy actually are acquainted. So I'm going to let you go ahead and ask her a few questions and share.
Great. So what I'm most curious about first, Nancy, is when you veer on a road less traveled, how does that feel to you? How do you know that's the way that you feel is the right way for you?
Wow, that's a good question. So I guess I know it's less traveled because maybe people in my surroundings, that doesn't seem to be the road that they are taking. But it just feels like the right, road and opportunity. And again, like when I think about different things that I've done, it's like often just feel it in my heart and my soul and feel that pull that this is something that I want and need to experience, even if it's a little bit scary and there could be some risks going down that road.
So how do you muster the courage to keep moving down that road? Because I know you mentioned risk, and I think whenever a person is really following his or her dreams or following what they feel their soul is leading them to do, it requires making some decisions that can be kind of scary. So how do you handle your courage? What do you do to stay courageous, to stay grounded, and to keep moving forward on that path less traveled?
Okay, so I guess one, surrounding myself by people who are encouraging, right? And seeing the potential for the outcome of that. Um, so for example, you talked about South Africa. That was a dream of mine since I was younger to go to Africa. And when I was in college, I made the decision to backpack South Africa by myself for 2 months. And there were a lot of parts to that were scary and intimidating and took a lot of planning and preparation. But I think being able to see the outcome and look, what this can do for my life and how it can create meaning, that helps make a difference. And having, again, people that can support and encourage me.
So when you're on this path, when you're traveling a certain way, are there any certain kinds of signs that you see along the way that just touch your soul or that tell you, yes, I'm doing the right thing. This is the way to go? Because from my experience, it seems like we all have different ways of understanding how life or the universe or God or whatever we believe is speaking to us and encouraging us. I'm just wondering, in any of your adventures, did you have any signs along the way that reminded you or that affirmed for you, yes, I'm doing the right thing. I want to keep going?
I would say certainly, and I'd actually love to hear your thoughts on that too. One of the things that come to my mind, and I can share a little bit more about this later as well, but just even my involvement with the LGBTQ community and the opportunity that I had to step into that space and recognizing kind of what it did to my insides. Like I feel like I was just, my insides turned out, and realizing that I had a lot to unlearn and that I needed to do something to make a difference in my community. And so I think, to answer your question, it's listening to my inner compass and being able to recognize, some things feel a little bit scary and can be intimidating, but I definitely feel pulled that is in the right direction. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
I'd like to back up for 1 second
Sure.
and share a little bit, just because we're getting in such a great place already. Tell us just a little bit, so for our viewers' context, Nancy, about your background and why some of these roads less traveled or working with the LGBTQ community was more challenging, because you have a bit of an unusual background. So let's just share where did the road you've come from?
Okay, certainly. Well, I so appreciated you sharing your journeys as well. Like both of you, I grew up in a very religious community. It was has been such an integral part of my life, from weekly church service and youth activities, given responsibilities to serve, what I put in my body, what I read, how I spent my money, what I wore. I served a mission for my church overseas, the way that I viewed my role as a woman. And it's just really impacted how I view the world. And I have grown up in a religion where certainty is highly valued. And this idea that, we have the full truth and we want to share it with everyone. And I have had I had a very good childhood and amazing parents who were really balanced in the way that they taught us, just taught us good values, were very nurturing. And most of my life have been very devout in my faith of origin. I'd say I did sometimes feel a little out of the box and did things a little bit off the beaten path, but I've had some experiences the past several years that have caused some shifting for me, some deconstruction. I like the term faith expansion.
Mm.
And if it's okay, I'd actually like to share kind of an analogy about my faith journey that I think is really helpful. And it's not a perfect analogy, but it kind of makes sense for me. But I feel like I was born under a tree, a fruit tree. Let's just say it was a cherry tree. And I was told by the keepers of the tree that I was so fortunate to be born under that tree, and that the fruit from the tree was the most nourishing fruit out there. And that I should stay and pick the fruit and share it with others. And I have this basket with me, and I pick from the tree and I put the fruit in my basket and I eat the fruit. And then I saw that I was nourished and it was good for me. But one day I learned that some of the people that were picking from the same fruit from the tree were getting sick and they were not getting nourished. And so I looked into their basket and I saw that there were some rotten fruits in there. And I realized it was not a good idea for them to pick from the tree. And then I looked into my own basket more closely and I realized that not all the fruit in my basket was good, and that there was some not so good fruit. And I had to toss some of that fruit. And I looked up around me and I saw that there were other trees. There was an apple tree, pear tree, orange tree, and that there's other fruit for me to partake of and be nourished from. So that's just like my simple way of explaining kind of part of my faith journey.
I love that analogy. It's just so clear and so perfect in its expression. So I wonder, when did you start finding the courage and moving to another tree, and what was that experience like?
Sure. So one of the catalysts for me, so I lost my older brother to suicide in 2017. My brother was so generous and so kind and so smart. And he suffered from severe depression and he battled some mental health challenges. And all of us in my family, we grieved in different ways. But part of my healing journey was just to learn more about mental health and depression, just to help me have more compassion and understanding. And during that time of learning, I came across a statistic, and even though it wasn't connected to my brother because he's not LGBTQ, but I learned the statistic that 90% of LGBTQ people from my faith tradition contemplate suicide. And that hit me like a dagger. That was hard information to take in. And I had learned through this process that suicide is no respecter of persons, meaning that it can happen to all, ages, ethnic groups, socioeconomic backgrounds, but that there are some groups that are more vulnerable. And I wanted to understand why was this happening within my faith community. And so I spent the next year and a half, listening and learning and reading and meeting with people. And like I said, just kind of felt like it turned my insides out and that I just had a lot of things to unlearn.
So as you started exploring, did you experience resistance from some of the leaders of your faith community? And if so, how did you stand up to them and continue to explore?
I would say yes. Again, that kind of goes back to the road less travel and braving the wilderness, a little bit off the beaten path. I think I always tried to approach it in a loving and kind way and inclusive. And I did end up creating a support space for LGBTQ people within my faith tradition with background. And I would say yes. There was some. I think also people respected the work that I was doing within the community. And so I was able to have good conversations with people. But I had to make that decision that I can't unknow what I know. I can't unlearn what I've just learned. And I need to do the right thing. And so that just helped me move forward and just realize that that could have consequences. And I'm okay about that.
Wow. So I'm curious to know, Nancy, if there were so many LGBTQ struggling people in your faith, how were you able to reach out to them and how did they find a way to get support from you rather than stay in resistance and fear and everything else that was wrapped up in whatever made them feel suicidal?
I just started reaching out to a couple of people. There's some different groups that exist that I would make contact with one person, or I'd go onto this particular Facebook group and just kind of started saying, hey, I'm going to have this event at my house. If you know anyone, if you want to come. So I really just started at the like just started at the bottom and just started reaching out. There is a huge community of support out there and people that are doing things in different states. And it just kind of got the ball rolling. And then people learn about you and learn about what you're doing and just, start kind of spreading the word. So that's really how it started.
That is so, so beautiful. Just moving me, and I'm relating to so many things you're saying, of course, like on a visceral level, Nancy, coffee for another day, as you know, but wow. So just taking 10 seconds here, we're at about the midpoint of our show already. And if you are watching, if you would like to share a comment, we very much like our show to be interactive. We want to really get to know our viewers and listeners. So if you are watching live, please comment, send a question to any of us, and reach out. And then please like and subscribe so that we can keep this content coming to you and other amazing guests who are sharing their story like Nancy is today. And just thank you, Nancy, so much. So Roger, I think you had something else to ask her.
So I'm curious to know, Nancy, as you're doing all this in different contexts, not just for the LGBTQ community, but, the show that you do with your dad and everything, what kind of positive reinforcement is the universe or God or life providing you that encourages you that this is a way that works for you and that you want to share it with others? What are some rewards that you've gotten along the way that have confirmed for you, this is my road, this is my path to take?
That's a great question. I think just the people that I've met and feeling that it has had an impact on them, just that word comes to my mind, impact. And um, with, as we spoke about, with this community and the people that I've interacted with and how they've impacted my life, but also just, the work that I do with my dad and the things that we've been able to share and people who reach out to me and to us and explain how that has made a difference either in their relationships or in their family. And I think the other thing, I do a lot of interfaith work and connect with people from different faith communities, and I bring people to this space. So I will bring a group of people to the Hindu temple or to the Muslim mosque and attend events. And I think it's so interesting and fascinating and rewarding to see kind of this look in people's eyes like, wow, we share so much more in common than we do differences. And this is such a beautiful experience. So I think the reward is seeing the impact.
I love that. I just love it. I just had to say no, because that was something, that I found meaningful too, was, visiting other faiths, and not to the extent that you have, but and that idea of, and this is something we talked about last week on the show, like one of the purposes of this conversation is helping us find our similarities and how we can support each other instead of just focusing on the difference, instead of just focusing on the labels. Because if you share a conservative background, there's a lot of labels. I even learned that I was labeling the people I was judging for labeling me. So I think you both understand where I'm coming from.
Sure. So I'm curious, Nancy, you do so many different things in so many different areas, and you're always setting new goals, and you set your sights so high. For those listeners and for Ann and me, how do you do it? How do you keep up? How do you keep your life in balance so that you're able to do all that you do? Because you're accomplishing so much.
You're so nice. I feel the same thing about both of you. And to be honest, I'm just doing what I can, the best that I can. And I have days when don't think I'm doing so great. My kids can attest to that. I think I like what you said though, Roger, in your other show, is about, kind of your passion is your purpose and being able to find things that bring you joy. And I also try to be good about not being involved in too much and setting boundaries, because I think that's important. But I also get excited and motivated by things that do bring me joy, and still paying attention to self-care, making sure we're always taking care of ourselves, because we're able to give more when we take care of ourselves. But I feel like if I enjoy what I'm doing, then it's easier for me to dive in.
And Nancy, you brought up family. So I'm just going to ask for those out there, especially those who have kids. How do you sustain your personal spiritual experience? How do you find the time for that when you have kids and a household and you're doing so many other things? Because I know that's what a lot of people ask about.
No, that's a great question. And I feel like I'm still figuring that out and evolving. And because there's been some shifting, I used to embrace the certainty so much of my faith and my practice. And now that there's been some deconstruction with that, it's trying to figure out what do my spiritual practices look like? And I'm okay that I don't know exactly what that looks like or how that will change in 2 weeks or 5 months. But I think that it is important to take time to care about that. And I've come to recognize, this difference between religious practice and our spirituality, and finding things that bring spirituality to my life. I have a group of close friends that we talk about these things often and share spiritual things that are happening and things that uplift us. And that has become like a source of strength for me, a safe space. And been learning a lot more about mindfulness and meditation and trying to have that play a role in my life. But I'm still trying to figure it out. So
beautiful, beautiful.
So Nancy, I'm curious. So my next book that comes out in June is my spiritual journey from where I started as a young person to finding my own road less traveled. And I'm wondering, are you still close friends with some people who have remained on the road more traveled? And are you still able to have a mutually supportive relationship, even though you have veered in another direction that feels more authentic to you? Are you still connected to those people, some of those people who have maintained that main course and are very happy and fulfilled with it? Are you able to maintain a friendship and a mutually supportive relationship there?
Absolutely, 100%.
How do you do it?
Well, I guess I want to back up a little bit and say, I don't necessarily think that I'm always traveling the most untraveled road. Sometimes I'm grateful for a road that's more paved. So just to give you kind of like an analogy to that, a couple weeks ago, I was visiting out of state and I had a chance to go cross country skiing. And I know you mentioned that. And it was the first time in like 2 decades. So I felt like a beginner. And it had just snowed the night before. And so there was fresh powder. And I was a little bit like nervous because I hadn't been on skis for a long time. But I was so grateful that there had been a couple skiers right before us that paved that path a little bit. And it made it easier for me. So I think that sometimes I am so grateful for that path that is traveled on and for people who have prepared a way for me. And I don't necessarily think that everything I do is braving the wilderness or going against the grain, but I feel that there are many times in my life where I do have to brave that wilderness. And I don't necessarily think I'm more enlightened or my path is the best way to go. I honor people's journey. And so even if people still pick from the tree and that is the tree that they pick from and it's in their basket, if they find that it is so nourishing to them, I honor that completely and love them and have so many close relationships with people that have very different, spiritual journeys.
And do you find among those people that there are as many people who are supportive and encouraging of you as there are people who don't quite understand why you're doing what you're doing?
I would say yes. I would say yes.
That's really beautiful, actually. That's really beautiful. And I think reminds me and anyone else who, is working on the road less traveled, or at least from the way we grew up. Again, speaking for myself, my own judgment, right? Not judging everyone as the same, which is what this show is all about. It's all about finding your individual spirituality, but you can find that within the community that you resonate with spiritually or not. But a lot of people are supportive and loving. I mean, when I went through my divorce, I had some really rocky experiences with people that were important in my life, in my spiritual community. But then there were also people who were undyingly loving and supportive and were there for me. And, I remember someone who came and I wouldn't leave the house, and a woman who was barely new and just a very unassuming, kind person. And she came and said, let's go to a different church today so that you don't have to see those people you don't want to see. Wow. So just because, there I go again, just because they are still picking from the same tree, seeing the beautiful hearts and the compassion of so many people and accepting it is beautiful.
And Anne, I love what you said about realizing at some points that sometimes you're judging the people who are judging you. I noticed when I was younger, especially, that was a defense mechanism for me. It's just like, I'm expecting them to judge me. So if I can find some fault in them first, I can not feel so vulnerable. Yeah. But what's been most interesting for me, based on what you said, Nancy, and then Anne, what you shared, is that the surprises that I get, the people that I didn't expect to be loving and supportive, were the very ones who came through for me when I needed them most. That was such a blessing because it came so unexpectedly.
And I think being able to accept, like, some relationships will change, and getting to the point where you say that's okay, or things are going to shift. The support of this community may look a little bit different, but that's okay. And that's like a headspace that you have to get to a place, right? Where, because it's easy to really care a lot about what people think. And it's kind of empowering when you can feel a little bit more comfortable with saying, I have to not worry so much about what people think.
One of my favorite quotations is, We'd worry a whole lot less about what people think of us if we realized how seldom they do.
So true. So true. Amazing.
And I just feel like I want to treat everyone with kindness. And so instead of holding in this like suspicion of what are they thinking about me, or, just love everyone and
Mhm.
treat them with such respect. I mean, back to your quote, Roger, right? Every person in your life represents a piece of your soul. How you treat them is how you're treating your spirit.
Yeah.
That's key.
And I really think it begins by how we treat ourselves. Once we learn to treat ourselves lovingly, it's so much easier to do that for other people because we're not always coming from a place of, I need you to approve me. I need you to love me back. I need you to respond in a way that makes me feel good. If we can, as you were saying, Nancy, really engage in good self-care and we get to
Mhm.
the point where we learn how to love ourselves, I think then we're much more adept at loving others unconditionally and without the expectation that there's got to be something, some sort of feedback from me to let me feel okay about this situation and myself.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask you both in that tune. Um, when you are experiencing that challenge with someone in your past, especially not caring what they think, or when, as on this road less traveled, we fall back into habits of guilt.
Mhm.
A family member or a close person in our life who doesn't understand our path. How do we love ourselves in those moments where we feel like we may have caused others pain?
Nancy, you want to start there?
Well, no, that's a great question. You go ahead because I'm putting my thoughts together.
Sure, sure. So I think it comes down to realizing that everyone is a mirror of ourselves.
Mm.
And that when we recognize something about somebody else, whether we love it about them or we judge it about them, it's not about them. It's about the piece of ourselves that they are showing us. And if we have done something, if we've acted in a way that's been out of character for us, then we can repair it by using them as a mirror to see who are my mirrors out there who can guide me to a better way to handle things. And
Mm.
since we're always in process and always learning, there's forgiveness. It's like, I knew what I knew at the time. I may have
Mhm.
made some mistakes. The guilt is not helping me other than reminding me that something needs healing. And in that way, the guilt can be a very helpful tool. So long as we don't stay there, so long as we move from the guilt into the action of doing what we need to do to heal the situation.
Yeah, I think one thing for me, part of my journey has just been being able to let go of certain beliefs and not hold on to them. And sometimes with religious spaces, there can be so much guilt and shame. And being able to let go of certain ideas of what my responsibilities are for that can be very empowering. Um, and that's been a process for me to work through, right? And in relationships, how those shift and just being able to do my part. I can't always control how people respond, but I can control how I treat them.
I love that so much.
Beautiful.
So we still have a few minutes, but we're nearing the end of our show already, which I mean, I could talk for hours to both of you. This is just amazing. I feel like we just barely started. So I thought maybe each of us could ask you sort of a closing question or a wrap-up question, Nancy. So if you had a word of wisdom from your, at least from your personal journey, from your personal experience, to give someone who feels that they are still stuck under one tree and they're not content there and they do want to reach out, but they're fearful, what can you say to them to encourage them?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it kind of goes back to, right, that braving the wilderness. And I love how you talked about like a beautiful wilderness that
Mm.
even though it can be scary or intimidating, it is also so beautiful. And, we've obviously talked about faith, but that road less traveled, it might be a faith change or expansion, but it might be new friendships, or it might be listening to other views, other political views, or might be trying something you've never done before, or going back to school. I'm going back to school after being out for 20 years. And so I think just having this idea that there is something beautiful through that process and on the other end, and that it's worth taking the leap.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I'm curious, Nancy, in regard to the person who told you you marched to the beat of a different drummer, from my perspective, and this is just my opinion, I believe that the reason your life is turning out so phenomenally is because you chose to recognize that as a compliment rather than get defensive and see it as an insult. How do we do that? How can other people learn to do that?
That's a great question, right? Like just being able to reframe something. It's funny because sometimes I'll do that with my kids. They'll say something and I'm like, thank you. Like, I'm just going to say thank you to this rather than, I know they're meaning it differently, but like, you dance so weird. Thank you. But I think like being able to reframe things. And so one of my friends recently, she read like this oracle to me and I wrote it down. I just want to read it, but I liked how it said, it says, you must go against the grain. It is just your way. You're not one of the followers, but one of the agitators. However, yours is not a force of disrespectful chaos. You are a loving catalyst. And by simply being yourself, you constantly remind people that there is always another way.
Wow.
And I love that idea too of loving catalyst. And that, we sometimes will do things differently, and we can, back to what you said, Roger, just being able to reframe the things that get said to us or about us and realize, this can be something that can help me be a force for good.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you, Nancy.
I love that. I love that. And if any of you joined us late or didn't guess, I will share the quote that Nancy picked today for the theme of this episode and her journey. One of her favorite quotes by Robert Frost. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. Well, we want to thank you for being with us here, Nancy. And before we go, I think, Roger, you had something else to share.
I was just going to wrap up with one quick thought that I had this week. So during undergraduate school, I worked at a grocery store, and I had a coworker who said, "This job is so easy and so boring. I can walk in the front door, set my brain on autopilot, and cruise through the day." When I thought of that dream I had this past week, I realized the key for me of being happy and really growing is to make sure I'm never on autopilot. So much of our life is happening now. We may see things as routine, they may look familiar, but actually, even the stuff that looks familiar is new territory leading us directly to our dream. And so, as Nancy so profoundly shared, there are converging paths. We get to choose which way we go and how we respond to what the universe brings us. We're always at choice. We make good choices when we stay spiritually awake.
Wow, that really struck me, Roger, about not being on autopilot, and the other version of that, or the other road, which is being in flow. Now, they can kind of sound similar, but autopilot is sort of a pre-programmed, the one tree. This is how I am meant to be, as opposed to I am a boat on a natural river and it's going to diverge and we're going to go around little islands and we're going to, maybe we're going to go into a different river. And being in the flow, being in that spiritually whole flow and following your gut, which I call your inner genius, is so important. Autopilot is safe. Going in flow is creative and productive and makes you more able to give back and share with the world around you, which is exactly what Nancy's doing in so many areas of her life, from working with Afghan refugees to teaching to so many things. Wow. Well, thank you all. we're right here at the end already. I want to thank all of you who watched and joined us today. Please join again next week, same time, which is always a live show at noon Eastern and 9 a.m. Pacific. And please do like and subscribe. We would really like you to be joining us, and think of comments or questions you might have for us next week. We really want to make this a show about you, the viewer, and getting to know you and your needs and your spiritual journey. So thank you all for being here today on I'm Spiritual But. You can find out more or reach out to us on our website, which is in the notes. Thank you all. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy. You were great.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And have a wonderful day. Thank you. Hi, I'm Ann Scottlin. Are you one of those people who always wants to aim higher? Would you like to increase your profits and your personal fulfillment at the same time? And wouldn't you love to make a greater impact in your business and your life? If your answer is yes to any of those, find out more and send me a message at annscotland.com/special. I would love to work with you.